Hey guys, thank you for joining us. We will kick off in a minute. I always like to give it a minute or so to let stragglers join. Cool. All right, we'll kick off. So this is one of our technical workshops. Today we're going to be covering VoIP, sort of more of an advanced session than if you joined us last week. So we'll be getting into our system, going through some call flows and sort of getting in a bit more into the nitty gritty. As always, please ask questions. This is a technical session, so if we can answer things, we can show you things, all of that. We're going to be doing a bit more of a technical demo than last time, whereas a bit more theory. This will be recorded and sent out afterwards. If we don't cover something and you would prefer to book a one-on-one with our technical team, there is a link in our signature of all of our staff. So you can book that at any time or just go through your account manager. We're always available for training. At the end of the day, if you guys can support the product. Sorry, my computer just disappeared. Hang on. Am I still sharing?
Cool. Yeah, you're still sharing.
Sorry, I somehow managed to put my computer in lock mode. So anyway, and so I lost my screen.
I love these technical glitches during live sessions.
Kind of just wet myself. All right, so Dylan is going to be doing most of the run through today, but I'll just sort of kick us off. So we'll just do a quick roundup of last week very quickly, and then we're going to go through sort of the concepts around how our system rates data and how you apply your margins and things like that. That piece of it is very important. So getting you and your team across that to make sure that if you are using our platform, you are actually putting margin if you're charging and not using our unlimited products. Going through some of the reporting bits and pieces, and then we're going to get into a bit more of the components around the system, the functionality, and doing some demos and things like that. I think we're actually going to skip the Teams direct routing, but if we have time, we will touch on that. And yeah, so all right, so I'm just going to add all this to the screen. So a quick roundup of last week. We covered our overview of our VoIP products. So very, very quickly, we have our VoIP bundles, which are our sort of unlimited mobile, local, and national calls, and they include the handset. We also have our SIP trunks, which come in unlimited and pay as you go. Which also covers Teams direct routing, and we have our multi-tenanted PBX. They all share the same platform underneath, which is why we're going to be doing that demo today. So you can use the same platform to control all of your different offerings. So yeah. Use cases, we covered that last week. This is recorded, so I sort of don't want to go through it too much. Considerations when scoping, migration best practices, and a very quick introduction into the VoIP Now platform. So that is available. If you attended last week, it would have been in your inbox. That Meryl, is that is available on the website now as well, yeah?
Sorry, I missed that. I was responding to
Sergey. Oh, that's all right. The recording of last week is on the website, yeah?
Yeah, it is. It is.
Cool.
It's on the events section of our website on the on-demand. I'll show you that, guys, that later in the session.
Cool, no worries. All right, so let us get into it then. Now, we did add this slide last time, but for obvious reasons, we're going to add it again. Dylan, do you want to kick off?
Yep. So covering off this again, as Ben said, we covered it off in the last webinar, but very common issue is that people go with quite an unreliable internet connection, especially if you've got fiber to the node at the moment. So if you are in a position where you can only get a pretty lacking internet connection, we do recommend getting a separate 25 by 5, like fiber to the node service or something like that, purely because that way you can dedicate that connection to the phones, and you can generally get a better result out of that, because we don't recommend using your typical 4G or 5G services for phones for failover, because a lot of those are double natted. There's also a lot of latency on those and can introduce some really odd issues that could actually quite upset the customer. But if, say, you don't have the option of getting another one, you can use things like quality of service to try and prioritize the VoIP traffic. So that way, if the customer does suddenly, say, open OneDrive and it starts syncing all their files, the VoIP traffic is going to get the priority. Beyond that, there's some other minor things like turning off SIP-LG, which will, in most of the more modern routers, with the exception of the cheaper ones, you can log in and just turn that off under the NAT settings. If you don't have the option of turning it off, there are ways around it by using things like SIP TLS, and sometimes the encryption will actually help you bypass that.
And we include a lot of those details in our service completion advices. So when you, and in our knowledge base, so our knowledge base is public on our website, so you can view all those details. But I just want to sort of underpin this here, and I think I did this last week, but you know, internet reliability, it's not about the speed, right? It's about the reliability of the connection. So, you know, the packet loss characteristics, the stability of the latency, those sort of things, which is why 4G and 5G really aren't very good, because of the jitter. Now, like it says down here, ensuring that these are covered off initially will dramatically reduce your support, right? Which means that you're going to be able to focus on other things, and you're going to have a happier customer. So it's kind of, it is very important to get it right from the start. So if you consider these things from the word go, you know, when you're quoting a voice solution, you know, 25 by 5 in a dedicated router is going to cost maybe an extra $40 a month. It's, you know, but to keep the customer happy and make sure that, you know, everything is smooth sailing, making sure that you get it right from the word go it'll just pay dividends in the long run. It really, really will. And it's usually where we see support tickets is where, you know, solutions were just, they were sold and they weren't, you know, typical sales, right? They were sold and they weren't really thought about. Remember, if you're new to VoIP, if you just need a hand with the actual solution and quoting it and, you know, speccing it up, all of those bits and pieces, we're there for you, right? So leverage your account manager, you know, let them know that you want to jump on a call. We can run you through it. We can, you know, handhold you through your first few to get you comfortable with it. And that way, you know, you start off with your best foot forward. Cool. Okay. Let me just get rid of all of my drawings. And now, Dylan, charging plans. We've really got to stop doing this.
So we did mention it briefly in the last webinar, but with the charging plans, there's a lot of flexibility to have multiple different types. Say,
well,
if you had different,
can we cover what they are?
Yeah, I can definitely do that. So charging plan essentially is the baseline of how much you want to charge for outgoing calls, adding a margin to it, even to the point of you can charge different amounts to different destinations, as you can see in the cost exception screenshot there. If adding on to that, if you wanted to, say you had a basic, premium, advanced, like different levels of plans, you could actually say give them free minutes. As you can see in the screenshot there, you can give them free minutes each month as a part of a promotion. You could charge more to mobile calls, or charge even more to international calls. So that way, if they do make those calls, you're still going to be getting a fair bit of margin back on that. It's incredibly flexible on that. And you can change the charging plans at any time throughout the month, but there are some things to consider that it won't retroactively change the calls that they've made already throughout the month.
So that means that if you're halfway through and you change it, any calls will be billed still at the old rate, yeah?
Yeah. So if, say, I'm not adding any margin onto my calls halfway through a month, I go, oh, I've forgotten to add margin to this, flick it over, all of a sudden they're only getting charged for half a month of calls. So it won't go back and recalculate everything. And
Dylan, this is the same for all of our voice products, right? Whether it's a SIP trunk, VoIP bundle, multi-tenant PBX, Teams.
For all of our SIP trunks, all of our VoIP bundles, any VoIP product, you have the ability to add these margins yourself. Some partners choose not to; they choose to just pass the call cost through. In other cases, they might add, say, to 20 or 30% on top. It's really up to you how you would like to do it.
I'm going to throw a little sales note there, put my sales hat on for a second.
Yeah.
Always look at what your customer is paying previously.
I was
You don't
about to mention.
necessarily, I'm never a fan of having a list price in that sense, because I've seen some partners where they might be charging, 20% for one customer, but they're charging, 70% for another. And because you've got the flexibility of doing that for mobiles versus local and national, you can mix it up per customer, per call type, get creative.
And adding on to that as well, with our rebilling system, it directly pulls these call costs straight from VoIP now. So the rebilling system is going to use whatever margin you specified on the charging plan as what it pipes into that invoice. So you're going to want to make sure when you bring a customer on board that you get that right from the get-go. Otherwise, it's going to cause some headaches further down the line.
Yeah, we really can't update it for the past. We have had partners where they've forgotten to add their margin. They want us to go and reapply it. If you need to do that, you're kind of going to have to download the CDRs, into a spreadsheet and recalculate them all manually. Unfortunately, the system won't do it for you.
Yeah, so that's just one big thing to keep in mind when using the rebilling system. Some partners even choose to make it so that at the organization level, it zeroes out the call costs and just do it as a bundle, like what we do. But keep in mind, if you do it that way under wholesale VoIP, you do still need to pay for the call usage. It just means that in the rebilling system, it will zero out the call cost and you can just charge a flat rate or something like that.
And this is with charging plans as well. I'm just going to highlight this sort of section here, right? So this is where you can actually set limits, right? From a toll fraud protection. I told a story, I think last week, when the NEC phones, the manufacturer password of NEC PBXs got leaked, and there was a heap of toll fraud over a very short period of time. The charging plans is how you can actually protect yourself. You can set a limit that the customer can actually spend. You can set it to unlimited as well, obviously, like this, but there's a risk to doing that.
As well, you can limit that to minutes if you wanted to as well. So you've got a bit of flexibility there. And the important thing is, if you set this at the organization level, that limit is per organization. It's not for your entire account. So if you've got 5 organizations and they've all, say, each got a $100 limit, and one of them hits that limit, the other 4 won't be affected. So that's just one thing to keep in mind.
Cool. And you can create a default one and then, apply that to all your customers if you want. You don't have to create one over and over and over again. But, you do have that flexibility if you want to get creative. Cool. Anything else you want to add there, Dylan?
No, that's pretty much it. I'll cover off a little bit more once we jump into the demo.
Cool. All right. I've got to go back. Oh, dear. What have I done? What have I done? I don't know what I've done.
Ben, do you work for a tech company or?
Hang on, guys. That is not meant to be sharing. Jeez. Development roadmap of our partner portal. There you go, guys. You'll be able to see everything that we've got planned. I don't know what just happened.
Not sure how you managed that, Ben.
My Chrome just crashed. Wow. I'm not having great fun. Dylan, have you got the slides?
I do indeed.
Do you want to share?
Let me put it into presenter mode on my other screen.
The longer that I'm out of being on the tools, the more and more dangerous that I get.
The more of an end user you become.
The more of an end user I really have. It's terrible. I don't even know what happened. In this, I've locked my laptop somehow, and I've somehow killed my Chrome.
Is that coming through all right?
Yeah, that's better.
Perfect. So VoIP now comes as well with some advanced reporting just built into the platform itself. So you can see things like why calls failed, the success rate, average success rate of calls, who's receiving the most amount of calls, and what the average length of those individual extensions is. Queues as well, though, they provide a little bit more of an advanced one, which I'll jump into once we actually jump into the interface. But it goes down to the fact of why someone hung up. Say they hung up because they reached a timeout and the system kicked them out, or they just hung up, or the agent hung up on them. So it goes in a little more granular with the queues. So it's why we usually suggest using those.
And that's handy for when someone complains about call quality they couldn't hear or whatever. You can actually sort of see, well, how was the call actually terminated? So it can be handy in that sense.
Yeah, exactly. So in addition to that, queues actually provide a fair bit of functionality, again, which I'll jump into next, but as well as it also lets you see, okay, person one is receiving a lot more calls. They're on the call a lot longer than average compared to everyone else. So maybe you want to adjust the call routing based on that. So it allows the customer to see who's being overworked, who's not doing enough, and you can sort of adjust the call routing based on that.
And I don't know whether you touched that. But customers can log into the portal and actually view these details themselves. Yep. Yeah, cool.
So you can give customers access to this. There are a few permissions, which I'll show you in a moment, that you can adjust. But we typically recommend just giving managers access because they would have access to a lot of information that the staff themselves may not need to see. But you can give them access to the organization level or the per user level. So per user level might be good to give staff access to it if they need to grab call recordings and things like that, which might be good for a sales team. Or it'd be good to give managers access so they can go in and grab the recordings of their team for, say, just reviewing a call. Maybe there was a complaint or they're just doing spot checking. So you can definitely give them access to that.
Cool.
And moving on. So moving on to the next few slides, we're just going to go over the quick basics of what the most common extensions in the system are.
Terminology, I guess, as well, because our guys will talk this, support tickets, you're going to see it in the system, what does it include, whatnot. So that way, when we get into the demo, it makes a bit more contextual sense. So
your most common one is just going to be a standard phone terminal extension. So this is just going to be your standard extension that you use to register a SIP phone against the system, make outbound and inbound calls. You can't really make any outbound calls without one of these, as well as it provides you basic functionality of voicemail, faxing, call recording, conferencing. So all the things you would normally expect. And
there's no extra cost if you're using us as the PBX. So if you're using us as the SIP trunk, that's down to your PBX. This is only if you're using us for the PBX, right? Yep. So if you're setting up, if you're using Teams direct routing, or if you're using one of our SIP trunks, this doesn't apply. This is just for our VoIP bundles and our multi-tenanted PBX product.
Correct. So next one's the second most common one is going to be your IVRs. So this is some people might know it as an auto attendant, but it's your typical, say, you call up your bank, it asks you, press 1 for this department, 2 for that department, and you jump through the context menus. So one big thing that a lot of people don't realize with the IVRs is you don't have to have a welcome message. You can have it just doing pure call routing prefixing. So it comes in, checks what number you're calling, puts a prefix on it, and then routes it to wherever it needs to go, which we're going to demo that actually to you later on.
So a cool example of that is if, like, I don't know, that you wanted to do, the client had like 3 different brands, right? But the agents need to know what brand they're actually answering for. You can use an IVR to drive that, which I think Dylan's going to demo.
Yes, so I'm going to go through that specifically because a lot of people don't realize that the system has that functionality.
Cool.
As well as you can set up as many context menus as you want, jump back and forth between them. You can be really flexible with how you design it. There's a question.
Will we be covering SIP trunks? Yeah, so when we get today, yes, we will. So when we get into the demo, this terminology is more about the PBX, but the demo of the charging plans and things like that, we'll go through that. That'll apply to your SIP trunks and things like that. So we're probably about 5 minutes away from getting into that demo.
Yep. So I'll jump through this. And the next one's your queue, which I touched on before, which provides your call center functionality where you can add extensions to the system, both internal and external sources. So you can add, say, a mobile number in there and allow them to receive calls. It also allows them to log in and out. One of the interesting features it actually provides is the supervisor mode. It allows anyone who's marked as a supervisor to listen in on phone calls without either parties knowing. So that way you can say, if you overhear that they're having issues on the phone call, you can dial a few key codes on the phone and actually listen in and see like where the issue is. Maybe the customer's being unreasonable, something like that. And you've actually got to have your extension added to the queue and marked as a supervisor to access that. As well as you can have it set the queue to escalate to a different queue based on the waiting time, say if they've been in there for 2 minutes, as well as the typical things of you're in this position in the queue, your average waiting time is X amount of seconds. So the normal things you would expect in there. I'll jump through.
Regulatory, so we've got a question here. What are the regulatory implications of listening in on calls? Very good question. I would suggest each of you get your own legal advice for that. Little disclaimer right there. But no, typically speaking, we would always recommend that if you're going to have call recording turned on with the system or any system, whether it's ours or you're using a SIP trunk or whatnot, that you have a message letting them know that, hey, this call is being recorded for training and coaching purposes. The system does allow you, if you're using our system as a PBX, it will allow you to either turn it on by default, which means all calls will be recorded, and you can be a little bit specific with that, like which queues and things like that have it turned on. You can turn it on for specific users, or you can turn it on by dial code. So you can actually program a button on the phone. And if you've ever dealt with the banks where you've got to like accept the terms and they like play you a recording and you've actually got to accept it, that's for that sort of functionality if you wanted to do those sort of things. So the default one of letting people know and saying, if they don't want it to be recorded, then, they should let the, whoever's on the phone actually know. The exact legal terminology, I can't comment on. Not a lawyer.
Jumping into the first example of the call flow, I'll actually be demoing this one in a few minutes. So in this situation, the customer needs the ability to differentiate which number the caller is dialed to actually get into the system, because like Ben mentioned, they need to be able to answer the phone differently depending on which company they're trying to reach. Even though it's the same two receptionists for both companies, everything's the same for both. It's just two different companies incoming calls. In this instance, the call is going to come into the IVR, is going to check, okay, is it dialed company ABC or company XYZ, prefix it accordingly, and then pass it to the queue. So, and it uses the call did variable to be able to actually do that. And that's automatically set when the person calls into the system. It doesn't matter if they're calling from an anonymous number or a valid number. So both times it'll work. And as well as it's going to check if it's after hours, if it is, pass it straight to voicemail. So that way the phones aren't receiving calls after hours. And got another example, which is a lot more complicated. So just to demo, it runs off the same principle as the last one, where it's using that call did variable, except for this time it's prefixing it and transferring it to a separate queue, because they've got different extensions added into the different queues, because not everyone needs to receive the calls. But in this case, we're not doing any after hours voicemail. It just comes straight into the IVR, checks what company they're calling for, prefixes it, pushes it to the relevant queue, and then it'll follow whatever the queue is set to do. So for company, so for company 1, company 3, it's going to just keep ringing and then jump to the next queue if it reaches the timeout, and then just keep ringing until answered. It doesn't go to voicemail. Someone will answer it eventually. Whereas for company 2 and 4, once it hits that timeout, it's going to go to voicemail and send that as an email to the relevant email address.
So I guess the important piece of it here is that the incoming call flows are very, very flexible. So regardless of whether you're using us as the full PBX or if you're using us just for the SIP trunk, you can actually, you can do things like failover even, if the SIP trunk's not registered, divert to here. If you're, all sorts of things, even send it to a voicemail, things like that on our PBX before it touches yours. So if there's a outage on site, you can control those failovers and things like that, all using the incoming call rules. So.
Yep. So now I'm going to jump into the actual technical demo of the platform. I've already set up a few little things and just some extensions, so that way we don't have to go through everything again. So I'll just quickly switch to that. Sorry, I've got to bring up another screen.
While Dylan's doing that, like I mentioned last week, the portal that you're about to see, you can white label it. So if you want it to have be under your domain, your logo, your colors, you can do all of that, which means that, if your customers are logging into it, they can have a little bit of extra branding there. If you want to do the URL, there is a once-off charge to regenerate the SSL because it's all obviously encrypted. But the logo and the colors and whatnot, there's no cost to do that. So,
yep. So
by default, it's gray labeled.
Yep. So as you can see, like Ben mentioned, it's all gray labeled. No mention of hosted network in the URL or the actual interface. And I've already pre-created 4 users, call handling, essentially a user, and 3 end user users. And on here, you can immediately see that 2 of the users have extensions in them because I've pre-created those extensions in there, but the 3rd one doesn't. So the first thing I'm going to do is just quickly create a phone terminal extension, just to show you how relatively easy it is to do that. So you jump into the user, add an extension. Now, all the extensions in the system, whether it's for a queue, IVR, or a phone terminal, they're all going to be 3 digits. So you can go from anywhere from 001 all the way up to 999. It's worth noting that you should probably try to avoid the common emergency number ones, like 911 for America. 000 is automatically reserved in our system, but you can still provision an extension for 911. I have seen people do it and then get very confused when they call it and it doesn't work. Because they've already got an extension provision in there and it goes through their call flow or something like that. So I typically suggest just start at 100 and work your way up. For call handling extensions, you could start at 900 and work your way up. That way, the call handling extensions are all at one end of the range. But I've already got 100, 101, and I'm going to do 102. So I'll call this
just while you're on there, while you're filling that out, so you can also template all of this. So the settings that you're about to see next, you can create a template to speed this up, and that's like what Dylan's got there. We use for our bundles and things like that. So yeah.
And we've made this template available to customers on our system, so that way they've got a base one that they can use. If you do use a template, the option to set the parameters next won't be immediately available, but you can click the box to do that. I will click the box just so I can run through it. Now, in here, there's going to be a few things that you're always going to want to enable, which one is the preserve original caller ID on transfer calls and the send P-asserted identity headers. So preserve the original caller ID is important for when you transfer calls. If I was to receive a call and then transfer it over to, say, a reception phone, it would actually replace the caller ID with my extension rather than the person who's actually calling in, which makes it difficult to look at the call history. So we always just say to enable it, solves a lot of headaches. As well as sending the P-asserted identity header, this has recently become very important because the changes ACMA have made, that it requires certain headers to be sent so that it can identify the call. So if you were trying to make an anonymous call, but there was this option was disabled, and even though you've got no number attached to the extension, there's no number specified here, say just by setting it to user. If you try to send an anonymous call, it will reject it. And then that's going to be rejected by our upstream carriers, not by our platform.
Yeah, and it'll depend on, if you don't do that, it might work for some calls. It might not work for others, depending on the carrier that they're trying to call to. And that's really, it's not a law, but the different carriers have sort of gotten together to block the whole, hey, this is, so-and-so from Microsoft, or, hey, you've got a massive tax debt, you're going to go to the police, those sort of calls, right? So you can track them back. But also for emergency services, right? If you do anonymous and you don't have that ticked, there's the IP&D database that when you order a DID from us, that we enter the address that's associated to that. If you don't have that ticked, there's no data in the actual headers, and only the telcos can see that data, right? So that's us and the other carriers, not your PBX and whatnot, or your end customers' handsets won't be able to see that data. So it still remains secure, but it just means for emergency services and spam prevention, which is kind of handy for us all, right?
And just running through it, so you've got your typical voicemail settings, set the auto delete, how to send the message. By default, it will send you the voicemail recording via email into whatever email address you specified when creating the user. If they don't want it to be received by email, you can just put a fake email address in there. That way it only appears on the portal and on the phone. But if you do set a real one, it'll be available via email, on the phone, and through the VoIP Now portal. and it will keep it for however long you specify. Now, we Ben touched on the call recording before. So enabling call recording, that I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head. I can go and find out for you what the P and P-asserted and P-preferred I refer to, but I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head. With the call recordings, like Ben mentioned, you can have it set to only record when *1 is pressed. Using this option gives you the option to tick the play sound button. So if you do *1, it'll come in and say, and play whatever recording you have there. So you might have a privacy statement that you need them to listen to. Say you receive a call and go, are you okay to be recorded? Yes, cool, play the sound. And once the sound is done, it'll start recording the call.
Dylan, I'm just going to quickly, just if you can scroll back up for me, for that, the anonymous piece of it, if you are using a SIP trunk and whatnot, it's also important that your PBX supports that functionality. If you haven't had issues, you're not going to have to worry about it, but if you are setting up and use PBX, you may have to be aware of that as well. You do have to pass those details up via the SIP trunk as well.
Yep. So
sorry, I may have given you a bit of a bum steer a second ago, but the end client can't see it in that sense.
Yeah, and the other thing to keep in mind as well is if you're not passing these headers, it will still work in most cases as long as you're passing a valid caller ID.
Yeah, so it'll be a bit anonymous, but in the headers it has the caller ID, which has the in the back end databases for that we can see the address and things like that in the IP&D database.
Correct. So, and just finishing up the call recording, the last option is all calls are recorded. So it doesn't matter who it is or how it reaches the phone. You can say all calls to and from this phone are recorded. Now, that's probably going to be particularly useful for, say, a support agent, where they might need those for compliance reasons or for training, or even for a salesperson who makes a lot of calls and they want to be able to listen back to their calls. I know we've got a few people internally who use the all calls are recorded option, so that when they have a meeting with a customer over the phone, they can listen back and make sure they've got all their notes right and things like that. And typically would say auto delete recordings older than 14 days, so the system doesn't fill up. I'll go okay. Now our extension is created. If you wanted to go and register that on a phone, you just use the password that you set when creating it and this username. And these first 4 digits will be the same for all extensions inside the organization, because that's the org ID. Now I'll jump back to the top, just using the breadcrumbs at the top, and jump into our call handling extension so we can run through that call flow that we ran through before. So in this one, we're going to need an IVR and 2 queues. So I'll quickly just create all 3 of those. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to just put these in the ends of the range. Yeah. I'll assign both of these numbers. IVRs do have a fair bit of settings in here, but I've realized I've forgotten to change the type. Bear with me a moment. Add extension. You're going to want to make sure to change the type and not do what I just did. So IVR, tick the boxes. Now you can see there's a lot less options because in the general settings, there's not a lot to do in the IVR. You can do things like adjust the timeout and the lifetime. So this is the lifetime of how long maximum someone can be inside the IVR. So if someone just dials in and it just sits in an infinite loop, they can be in there for 1800 seconds. And then you can say hang up or transfer to extension, things like that. You can even clone the IVR settings from another extension if you've got another IVR already in the system. Go okay. Now the IVRs are pretty smart. They're going to warn you when there's inconsistencies in the IVR. Typically, if there is or there's changes pending, you'll get this yellow warning at the top. And if you click the button to the right here, it'll actually tell you what's wrong with the IVR. So in this case, you haven't got any context, so it's going to complain. So I'm just going to quickly add a context. Just call this main menu and specify it as the entry. And now, before I do anything in here, I'm going to create 2 other context menus just so I can go through and do some call routing with it. So let's call this company A. And jump back again, and we're going to add another one called company B. Cool. So now I've got my 3 context menus. You can see it is complaining because I've got nothing connected to these guys. So we'll go through and change that. This one isn't going to have a welcome message or anything. So this is going to come in, it's going to check the number and then transfer it straight out. Now, I'm just going to jump back here and grab these 2 numbers. So I've got those handy because these are the guys we're going to use the call routing for. Now, under here, we're going to do a jump to context, specify the context we want to jump to, and using the variable called did, which the system automatically sets when you dial in, if it's equal to the first number. So, and this needs to be without any dashes or spaces, because that's essentially the format it's going to be in.
Before you click OK, Dylan, sorry.
Yep.
Can you, on action, can you just drop that down and
Yeah.
just sort of like the different things that you can do, like there's heaps, right? You know, so you could build out an IVR that sort of does all sorts of things, whether it's, you know, passing digits, you can play sounds, you can get them to enter pin codes, you know, so if they come through to a particular after hours thing, you can get them to, you know, force them to enter a particular pin code for that particular client in order to go through to after hours support, things like that. You know, and then with the queues, you can, you know, you can tie all this in. You know, if you've got a company directory, you can get it to play, you know, hey, you know, these are the extensions for these, all of these users, all sorts of different things like that.
As well as you can set it up so that from the IVR at any point in time, if they know the party that the extension of the party they're trying to call, they can just punch it in at any time and it will transfer them across.
So everything that you would think that you can do with the platform. So, and this can kind of sit in front of a SIP trunk as well. I should add it, you know, so if your PBX doesn't have like Teams, sometimes Teams has limited support. We can, you know, you can hand off so before the calls get routed down. So.
So that way, if you've got a few different queues within Teams, but you want to use the functionality of VoIP now, you can do that. It can get a little bit complicated because instead of using extensions for the routing, you've got to use public numbers, but it is doable. In this case, so we've got our first rule. We'll go OK. And we'll just create another rule for the second company. And remove those dashes. So now that we've created those, if I jump back 2 steps, you can see these guys don't have a cross through them anymore. But we've still got this warning at the top saying that the changes are pending because any changes to the IVR aren't immediately live. It doesn't immediately go and push it live and potentially cause the customer to go offline if you're in the middle of making changes. The other benefit of that is you can actually test the call flow before it goes live using this button. And it gives you a code to dial from one of the extensions inside of the organization, and it'll call through to this new call flow. So if the customer wants to make a big change, you can actually go in there and go, okay, dial this, test it out, let me know what you think. If there's any problems, you can tweak it, and they can keep testing that until they're happy with it. Once they are, just hit generate IVR. And it was generated successfully. There's no errors with the call flow. One example might be that you might get an error with it if you've deleted an extension but not updated the call flow. It will actually complain saying you've got an inconsistent IVR. And
you can test it beforehand as well, right?
Yeah, that's so you can actually what I covered.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Sorry, I was being absolutely terribly rude and looking at my phone.
So now that I've got to the context menu set up, I'm going to set up the next part, which is I want it to prefix the call. So because we've already got company A and company B set up, I can just jump straight in here and go to start and just go, I want to alter the caller ID name. I don't want to do the number because if you alter the number, it makes it difficult to use the history on the phone to call them back. Whereas if you use the name, it only just changes the display name that shows up on the phone. Now, and you can do that a few different ways. You can either prepend, append, or replace. I most commonly see replace because that way it will appear in the format. I'll just quickly show you in a notepad what it'll appear as. So say I'm calling off my mobile, I select replace. It might come up as support, and then my mobile underneath it.
Oh,
So
sorry,
like
Dylan,
that
we
on
can't
the-
see that.
That you can't. Let me just adjust the screen share because I'm sharing the window and not screen. There you go. How about now?
Cool.
So it'll show up like this on the phone. If you use prepend, it'll show up like that. And if you use append, it shows up like that. So typically I just see people go replace. So that way it's nice and neat. They immediately say, okay, they're calling for support or they're calling for company A, things like that. So we'll go replace, say company A. Now, the next step would be to transfer to the queue, but I can immediately tell you we're going to have a problem with that because not time interval based, transfer call to extension number. If I click on the phone, I don't have any queues. So one important thing I wanted to do this on purpose was you're better off creating all your extensions first, then going through and doing the fine details, because otherwise you kind of have a broken call flow. Like
You have to go
broken flow
backwards
with
and
that.
forwards, and yeah.
So it's just one thing to do. Then it can annoy a few people because you can't just create a queue through here. So what I'm going to do is use the breadcrumbs, jump back to call handling, and jump into the queue. So same process for creating a queue. Just give it a name, select the type. Now you'll notice that the auto-generate details are grayed out because you can't register a queue or an IVR against a physical phone. The only extension that can be registered on a phone is a phone terminal extension. We'll go okay. Queue is a lot more involved than the other extensions because there is a lot of fine little details you can modify. There's things like you can maintain a specific amount of time between calls. So if I've received a call and hung up, this is the time it'll wait to transfer me another call. So if you do have a large support team, you may want to be able to give them, say, a 2 or 3 minute break between calls so they can enter notes or they can go get a drink or something. Or if you want, you can just set it to 0. So there will be no time between calls. As soon as they hang up, the next call will come straight through. So it's up to you how you want to configure that. As well as you can adjust the call distribution algorithm to a few different ones. You can have it to just be completely random. You can go random with member penalty, which I'll show you that in a moment, as well as least recently called. So that way, if there is one person that's receiving fewer calls than everyone else, they'll start to receive more calls than everyone else. So essentially automatically adjust them based on their volume.
I should just flag with these bits and pieces. If you purchase VoIP bundles with us, we do all this config for you as well.
Yeah.
Right. So you don't actually have to worry about it, but you can then go in and make any tweaks that you want afterwards. So
yeah, so we don't restrict you from making adjustments. Like typically we would disable things like estimated waiting time in queues, just because most people don't want that. But if you
it's never accurate. It's never accurate.
It's an estimate. But the one thing I do see some partners come in and do is they'll say come in and announce a whole position. So whether they're in position 1, position 2, things like that. They might come in and say once periodically, and you can adjust how often it tells you, things like that. But typically we would have these set to never. All of the sounds that it uses in the system, you can modify. So you can upload your own hold music, upload your own sounds for saying you're the first in line, things like that.
Default sound files are all included. So
yeah.
Yeah.
So, and you can see that you can play these through here. I don't know if.
No.
I don't think that transfers.
No.
Does it? No, I didn't think so. But you can modify it. You can listen to any of the sounds in the system. It has default sound files for hold music as well. But if you wanted to upload your own, you can. There's nothing preventing you from doing that.
What file format, Dylan?
It needs to be in .wav or .mp3. So if it's in .mp3, the system will convert it to .wav without a problem. But it does need to be less than 10 megabytes as well. But if it's anything else, the system will try and convert it, but I've had mixed results with that with some formats. We usually just suggest sticking with .wav. It produces the best results of the system.
Cool.
And lastly is your queue behavior. So you can actually tell it what to do in certain scenarios. Like if the person has been in the queue for say 30 seconds, you can transfer it out to another queue. you can actually prevent calls from entering this queue if there is no one available. So at least one agent is logged in and available. If, say, everyone logs out or everyone's on the phone, you can have it automatically skip this queue and go to the next level, which is particularly good. Say you've got a level 1 team and a level 2 team, and everyone in the level 1 team's on the phone, you can have it just jump straight to level 2. So there's a reduced wait time for the customer. So it's up to you how you want to do that. If you enable that, you can say when they're not allowed to enter the queue, transfer them to, say, level 2 extension. You can also drop people out of the queue if all of a sudden no one's available to take the call, and have them again jump to another queue, or just completely drop the call. It's up to you. So, and again, just enable the preserve original caller ID. Otherwise, it'll show up on their phone as the queue's extension number rather than the caller's number. And it will essentially wipe out any prefixing you've done. So you want to make sure to enable that. And I've got to untick these. Now, I'm just going to quickly create the second queue.
Could you, just before you do, Dylan,
Yep.
and I realize you've probably already done this, would you mind just quickly running through charging plans, just because I know that there's a couple of people on the call that, you know, are going to use this primarily for SIP trunks?
Yeah, definitely. So as I mentioned earlier, you can do charging plans at one of a few different levels. You can do it at the organization level. So if I
You'd normally do this at the beginning of the setup, but Dylan's already pre-configured it. So we looked at the slide before, but I thought it'd just be good just to quickly run through that, just if you are using, you know, SIP trunks or Teams or whatnot.
Yeah, so I've got 3 organizations here. If I want to do an organization level charging plan, say if you're using a wholesale VoIP solution, this isn't available if you're using VoIP bundles or SIP trunks, because you can only do user level charging plans for those 2. I jump into charging plans. You can see, like in the screenshot, I've got 3 different ones. Now, creating a new charging plan is as simple as you go add, give it a name. So test charging plan, assuming that isn't taken. I'm going to enable extended local calls to extensions. That means if the number already exists on our system, you can dial between those extensions with no cost. As well as, I'm going to set this to 500 minutes for like the limit to the public network. So if they hit that limit, they'll get a message saying that they've not got enough credit and they need to contact their service provider. I will show you in a moment that increasing this on the fly isn't difficult. You can either add a temporary amount, say if they purchased another pack of minutes or extra credit or something on their account for that month. It's actually really easy to adjust that. Or, as Ben mentioned, you can set a dollar figure. So you can set it to $100 and set it to 10,000 if you want.
Don't set it to 10,000.
Yeah, I was about to say, typically
that's a lot of VoIP calls.
We recommend limiting it to 1,000. If they hit this, I will be surprised.
Yeah, and if you're going to set it, just set your client's expectations that if you ever get that message, you know, to call you, and this is why you might, you know, if they only have 2 handsets, well, you know, $1,000 might be way too much. You might only want to send it to 100. They've got, you know, 50 or 100 handsets, you know, $1,000 or $2,000 might be more appropriate depending on what they're doing.
So, and on that topic, you can create multiple charging plans. You can have one specific for a customer, or you can have one that's a generic charging plan. It's entirely up to you how you want to do that. And just jumping down here, you're going to want to set all these to 60 because all of our billing to you is in 60-second increments. So you can set this to bill, say, every 15 seconds if you really want to. That may make the charging a little bit confusing to calculate. So we generally just say to leave it at 60 seconds because that way you can just add, say, flat 10% on what we charge you. Makes it everyone's life a lot easier to calculate it. As well as with the charging method, we generally say use relative to call cost because this is where it's going to make it easier to do those multipliers. So
this is your default multiplier. So we talked about before that you might just sort of say, you know, 30% across the board. Well, this will just do that. And then you can get into the fine grain of going, well, actually for mobiles, I want to put 70% on, and Dylan will show that in a second. Yeah.
So charging your outgoing calls, this is where you say you want to charge 10% extra on what we charge you. You can just do 1.10 times call costs plus 0 order second. So that's just going to add a flat 10% on top of all outgoing calls. Now, the rest of these, we're just going to set to one times call cost, this is actually all going to be zero because we don't charge you for internal calls. We don't charge you for incoming unless it's from incoming call to 1300. Is that right, Ben?
Yep.
Or is that 1800?
1300 and 1800.
Yeah. So those ones you will still get billed for, but we generally suggest just passing that through, and not too many of those come through from what I've seen.
If you want to do flag for, you can do it in the right-hand section is there as well. Not many people do that these days, but some legacy providers, you know, they'll charge a 10% connection fee.
Yeah, so you can do something like that, and that's basically here. I will quickly jump into this one. So our charging destinations, like Ben said, you can charge custom amounts to different destinations. I've loaded up a templated one here that already has a bunch of local areas for New South Wales.
This is effectively, this charging plan is how our bundles work, that how we include the unlimited, right? So it's not going to charge, it's not going to put any margin. The call record, the CDR will still exist, but it'll just be $0. So the timing and all of that will be recorded, the source, the destination, all of those things, but the dollar amount will just be zeroed out because of the free minutes. So that's how we do it. Dylan, can you just quickly maybe just jump back to your other one and just show adding a mobile one to the test one that you've just done?
Yeah, definitely.
Then...
So click into here. So I'm going to say for calls to the prefix, in this case, mobiles, give it a description. You can just call it mobile. Now you can either give it the 3 minutes package like we did in the other one, or the call cost. So this is where you can do the custom amount. Say you wanted to give 20% on top of mobile calls rather than 10%. You can do 1.20, and we're not going to do any extra odd per second. You can add an extra amount. So you can say you want to add an extra 50 cents per minute. It's entirely up to you how you want to do that. Then I can just go okay. And now
you can import these. You can see that section above. So if you want to do every, get really fine grain, you can. But that's why the default setting is there, because international there's a lot of different pricing for all of the international calls. There's hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds. So that's where the default one comes in really handy. And you can get fine grain with the cost exceptions that way.
Yeah, worth noting as well, if you've already got all your cost exceptions set up and you want to copy that to another one, you can just hit export and it exports it to a file. And then you can go into the other template, into the other charging plan and import it straight away. It's going to let you do that. So as I'll move back onto the organizations, like I mentioned, you can do user level charging plans as well. So if I jump into my webinar organization and go into charging plans, I've got a different set of charging plans here. You do need at least one charging plan in here. It doesn't have to have any margin or anything set. Like you can see, I'm just passing everything straight through. But if you wanted to, you could actually do different charging plans for different users. So say if you had like a customer who's in 3 different states, but in those 3 different states, you wanted to charge different amounts. Don't have many people who do that.
Interdepartment billing, things like that. So for some more corporate companies, they charge different departments and they actually do put a percentage on. That's how you do it. I have seen partners do it for, if they were reselling things as well, you can do it that way as well. So
yeah, there's not too many people that do it, but the option is there.
Yeah, the concept is the exact same as the first one. The page is the exact same. You just, but you will margin stack if you go down. So just be aware of that.
Yeah, and if I was to add 15% here, say on mobile calls, but I've already got 20% on the organization, you're then going to have 35% extra on top. So that can skew things quite a bit. You just want to be careful of that. Now, what I mentioned as well with setting that dollar figure, if say my webinar organization hit that $100 limit and they go, okay, we want to buy another $100 of credit for the month, you can jump into charging limits and actually go increase the limit by 100 and go okay, and it gives you a history that it was done. And this is a one-time option because the increase monthly option wasn't in there. If I was to increase the monthly limit, you can see it now says yes. So next month, they'll have this extra $100 already. It's going to stay there. It's not going to disappear. Whereas this one is only temporary for this month. When it rolls over, that $100 will be wiped away.
You can also go and just increase the charging plan, but that's for the new month only.
Correct. So You do have a bit of flexibility around this, as well as you've got a fair bit of control. And again, that message that it plays when they run out of credit, you can add your own custom one to say, you've run out of credit, please contact, say, hosted network support or something like that. So
So we've got a question here. Do per user charges override the default or stack on top? So yeah, they stack. So the first layer is like the organization layer. And then if you were to choose to treat the users as different departments or something like that, consider them as a group of extensions, then yes, they would stack. So if your first layer was 10% and your next layer was, 20%, it's going to stack on top of that. So it'll compound.
Correct. Cool. So that's essentially how the charging plans work. Most of the time, our partners will stick with just having one charging plan that has their margin on top, and they'll use that across the board.
Yeah. Remember, rebilling pulls from here, so it is important, to set it up.
And we're always happy to jump on the phone and set up if you have a very specific amount that you want to set it to. We're happy to help you out there without a problem. So
cool.
Yeah,
I'll let you get back to the other people. Thank you for jumping into that, Dylan. I just know that there was a few people with SIP trunks and whatnot. So
that's all right. But the user level as well with the charging plans, that user level I showed you is where you would access it for VoIP bundles and SIP trunks. So it's just one thing to keep in mind, and you can see the report of the usage. So throughout the month, you can see this report here, or you can go into call reports in the CDR here and get a breakdown for each month. So you can see a bunch of test calls. You can see the dollar value as well for that month so far. Okay, I'll jump back to the queues now. I'll leave off the second queue for now, just because we are running out of time a little bit.
Sorry, my bad.
That's all right. So I'm jumping back into the IVR. Now that I've got my queue set up, I can actually finish my call flow. So jumping into start. Now we've already got our alter caller ID name, so we don't need to do anything there. We just need to now transfer call to extension number and grab our extension, so our queue. You can just type in the number here. You don't have to click the little phone next to it. But typically, if you've got a small organization or the phones aren't set up yet, doing it this way is probably going to be a little easier. As well as you can actually play a sound before transferring. So in some cases, you might have a please hold while we transfer you to the next available agent message play when you transfer it to the queue. So you can upload the sound and then select it there. And selecting it as simple as click the little sound note and you search for it. So just as an example, you could select just welcome, which that sound file quite literally just says welcome. But in this case, we're not going to have that. I'm going to go OK. So now if they call company A, come into the IVR, it recognizes, okay, they're calling for company A, it needs to go to this extension after being prefixed. Now I'm going to replicate that for the company B one. As you can see, there's no active option for this one, but there will be in a moment. I'll quickly speed through this one. B. And transfer to extension 901. Cool. So that is all created now, and I've regenerated the IVR. And one thing I can do if I want to see how everything flows, and go IVR schema, and it actually gives you a handy little diagram of where everything goes.
I never knew that.
So, and you can actually, not that one, open image and new tab. You can actually download this. So if you had a documentation system for the customer, you could download it and add it in there.
Also good for getting them to validate it, right? So
yeah, so it gives you a little breakdown. Okay, if I come into this main menu and press option 1, where does it go? And things like that. So it'll only do this between contexts. It won't do it if you say, in this case, these two transfer out to another extension. So it doesn't show you if it transfers out there, but it will show you the flow of the context menus. Now that we've got our queue set up, I will jump back to, sorry, our IVR set up. I'll jump into the queue because one big problem is we have no agents. So if you call this queue, it's just going to sit in the queue and not go anywhere. To add an agent, you just come in and go queue agents, and you can add either a local or a remote. Like I mentioned, if you do have team members that say after hours specifically, you can add their mobile number in and have it so that when they receive a call, it asks them to accept the call, and then they can actually receive the call. That way you don't have to give out mobile numbers for after hours. They don't have to carry an after hours mobile or anything like that. And you can just simply have them log in and log off. And it's as simple as just give it a name, an ID, and you pop their number in there. So I'll just add me for example. So Dylan, give it an ID of 1. I'm not going to use a PIN code, and it's going to be static. So, and this is very, very important for if you're doing mobile landline external calls, because one issue I've seen with a lot of partners that use this is they don't enable this. The call transfers to the mobile, it goes to voicemail, and no longer in the system. Yeah.
Voicemail answers the call.
That's a big, big problem. I see it a lot. But if you tick this, it'll ask you to press 1 to accept the call or 0 to reject the call. That way, if it goes to your voicemail, chances are your voicemail is not going to be able to dial one of those.
Yeah, if anyone uses like OpsGenie or PagerDuty or anything like that for after hours calls, it's the exact same approach.
Yeah. So now I'll go okay. Now I've got that guy in there. I'm also going to add our to reception phone. So it's already got a list of extensions in here. And this is the supervisor function I mentioned. So unless you tick this, they can't add, like they can't actually listen into any calls. So they have to have that option done, and they can only do it from that extension.
If anyone's ever had to deal with like a call center where they had to buy the headset that like has the one plug but the 2 headsets on it, it means you don't have to do that. So, yeah. And yes, they actually exist if you haven't seen them. Kind of weird, but
they're a little strange. So I'll just leave that off for now though. And this is the penalty I mentioned. So you can adjust the penalty so they receive more calls or less calls. And this will only apply if you select the member penalty option in the call routing, in the routing algorithm, sorry. Most of the time though, most people aren't going to use this because they generally have smaller teams.
Or it's just going to, it's just going to distribute, make everyone ring, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and it's first person to answer it, essentially.
And then escalation queues. That's how we would typically use it.
So I'll add the second one in. Now, by default, you go in the logged out state. So I'm just going to log these guys in. Now, one thing they can do is if you give them the dial code, they can actually log in and out of the queues on their own.
Which also means you can program buttons on the phone to log in and log out.
Yep. So that
get
way,
in the morning, they press the button, happy days.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Good luck reminding them, getting them to remember to log out.
That's the only problem. Yeah, so now if it goes, regardless of which one they dial, if they do company A, it'll come in, it'll prefix it, transfer it to the queue. Now, the 2 reception phones and the person on the mobile. The person on the mobile won't see the caller ID name just because it's leaving the system. But the 2 reception phones will see that they're ringing company A, this is their caller ID, leave the number, and they'll be able to answer it with the correct greeting. Same with company B. And that's the gist of like a more advanced call flow. You can get a lot more complicated, which we don't have time for it today, but with transferring it to different queues, you can transfer it to external sources and things like that.
Just quickly while you're on this page, and even though there's no data in there, like if you wanted to see the performance of individual agents, you can, click the little view agent report. There's no data in here, but you can see their performance. All right, so kind of handy for managers and whatnot as well.
I might have one with some data. Queue report.
Just while you're trying to find that, if you do have any other complex configurations and call flows, what I recommend you do is submit that desired call flow to our support team. So then that way we can qualify it. Our guys can then confirm that the system is able to actually do what your end customer wants, and then we can give you that guidance. Yeah,
the amount of times that I see like partners submitting what they think, but because we've done it so many times, we can often do it in a simpler approach. So yeah, by all means, just submit a support ticket with that. And likewise, if there's anything that anyone would like us to cover, how do I do this? How do I do that? Feel free to just stick it in the questions because that's basically the end of the demo. So if you want us to cover something, just let us know.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly run through the queue reporting. So as I mentioned at the start, it does have advanced reporting on total calls ended by agents, callers, and things like that. This specifically is a big one I see a lot of people looking at. So they can see the calls were ended due to caller abandon or due to queue timeout. You can actually click into caller abandon and get a little bit more information, assuming my browser wants to cooperate.
This is all you can pull all this data via the API as well. So we have seen partners where they've integrated this into their CRMs, or they've integrated into wall boards, that sort of stuff. Dylan, we've got a question here. How do agent login logoffs work?
So with the agent login logoff, they dial a key code. So I'll see if I got a bookmark somewhere so I can quickly show you. But there's a key code they dial. They dial 1 to log in and 1 to log off.
So you can program that like a button on the phone that way, so they they can just press it and then they enter their agent ID and away they go, that sort of thing. So that way you could do hot desking, or you could just if that's their phone all the time, then they can just press one button and then press it again to log out, that sort of thing.
There you go, queue membership. So these are the codes that you can use. The last two are only if you're a supervisor, but these codes are all available to anyone who's registering an extension against the system. So you can log in the person who owns the queue. Yeah, so it'll say, when you log in, it'll say logging into this queue or logging off of this queue. So, and it plays that automatically when you've pressed the dial code. So there is a few other ones in here as well, say for the conferences, call recording, as well as some actual useful ones, which might be test extensions connection to the server. So you can actually do a test to see what their connection quality is like back to our servers.
From the handset?
From the handset itself, yeah. Jump back to here though, since my browser's cooperating now. So this is specifically for unanswered calls within the last 29 days. So you can see that unanswered calls were hung up between the different times, so time periods. So if you do all of a sudden have an extended number of people waiting in the queue, yes, we will try and get Teams direct routing covered in another webinar. If not, we can book a one-on-one and go over that specifically with you.
And we also do have some pre-recorded ones of that we've done that previously of Teams direct routing. They are also on our website. So check that out. We cover licensing. We cover all those bits and pieces. But just know that with Teams direct routing, you get all the charging components of that with this, and you can still use the rebilling system with Teams direct routing as well. So you kind of get all those benefits on top of the SIP trunk as well, or the Teams direct routing trunk.
Yep. And lastly, it gives you the disconnection causes. So if you are having complaints of calls failing, you can see that quite easily. As to why it's failing, say people are accidentally hanging up or they're timing out for whatever reason, you can see that in here. But that's the gist of the reporting. I mean, just a very high level look, but if you do have any other questions that you'd like us to answer, just let us know and I will switch back to the slides now. Stop share, bring this back over. Sorry, bringing the slides back up.
Cool. Well, guys, we are a little bit over, so a big thank you for those of you that are still on the call. Dylan, let's just skip to the next slide. I think Meryl's got one for the, yep, we don't have the one. Do we have the events one, Meryl?
I haven't. No,
Oh, okay,
I haven't, but I can share my screen real quick.
Yeah. There you go, go for gold.
Just a sec. All right. You guys see my screen?
Yep.
And my multiple tabs. All right, so to access our events page and see where the next technical workshops are, you can go to partner program events, and all of the upcoming technical as well as sales workshops will be shown there. You can click directly on them and yeah, register your details to join. The next one, so we'll move that from today, will actually be on our infrastructure as a service. But in terms of the follow-up for today's session, we'll just point you into the direction of how to get some technical resources related to VoIP, as well as the technical one-on-one session. If you do want more of a deep dive that's more tailored, then you can do a one-to-one session with our tech team on that.
Yeah, don't hesitate to reach out to your account manager for that either. Mez, can I get you? Oh, never mind. I was going to get you to scroll up there, just because the Teams direct routing is on that page that you can watch as well. So
yeah.
I can get you to share and go to, I think it's resources. Is
it is in resources. So if you go to partner program, navigate down to resources, we have a webinar. Will it fall into this right one? Yeah. So if you click on the webinar tab and then scroll down to Teams direct routing for service providers, that's one of the pre-recorded sessions that we did last year that targets.
Yeah, and it's mostly still current as well.
Yeah, it's current. And I can also send through details on the setup for Teams direct routing. So we do have trials for both Teams direct routing as well as VoIP. Yeah, I'll send that in the wrap up email if you guys are interested.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mez. Well, guys, thank you for joining us today. That concludes today's session. Like Mez says, next week we will have our infrastructure service one. So if you've got any technical guys or technical questions, if you're using our IaaS platform and you want to get your tech team trained up, send them over to us and we will take from there. Cool. Well, enjoy the rest of your day, guys, and thank you again for attending.
Thanks, guys.
See ya.
Thanks, everyone.
Enjoy the rest of your day.